Hello and welcome to yet another episode of BlackLantic. My name is Clinton Davis, and unfortunately, Hillary could not be with us for today's episode. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Zandra Pinette, who at the end of 2023 made headlines all across country for a story we're going to get into later on in the episode. Zandra is an Army veteran who is hoping that her story can reach more people, help more people through their pain, and help to make change within the organization that she was a part of. I need to turn that down. That's a little bit louder than I expected for the intro. Sorry for anyone listening on their earpods if that was a bit louder than you wanted it to be. We'll work on that in the future. Before we get started, I just want to highlight that BlackLantic Media acknowledges that we carry out our work on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Pekatomusqu peoples. So let's get into it. Zandra, hello and good evening. Thank you for being with us on our podcast. How are you today?
I am very well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's the new year. My kids are sick. I feel like a cold is trying to catch me. I've been trying to avoid that for the past couple days, but we'll see how that goes in the coming week. You are an Atlantic Canadian. How about before we get into your story, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, your upbringing, what that was like for you, and what life has been between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia?
Wow. Well, I was born in Francetown, Botswana. My father was a property developer there. Married my mother. My mother grew up in Zambia, but was born in Zimbabwe. And I was the Z with my name is very important because Zambia and Zimbabwe connection. I was supposed to be a Sandra. And I was raised by matriarchs, and my grandmother, she lived in a village in a mud hut, and my father was a property developer, and I grew up a very privileged life. I am biracial. My father's family is originally from Wolfville, Nova Scotia. That's where he was born. And my grandparents are Zambian and Zimbabwean and were from opposing tribes. They weren't supposed to be together. And it was a beautiful love story. And I moved to Indiana when I was 9 years old and didn't stay there long, but we ended up settling in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where I went to elementary, junior high, high school, university. And I was there were less than 10 of us at the elementary school when I was in grade 4, and kids that were brown kids. And we were the only kids that lived locally. We were near the University of New Brunswick and St. Thomas. So international students were the brown kids at the school. Mm-hmm. And we were biracial children. So half black, half white, didn't really fit in with anybody. Always felt a bit of an outsider. When I was in grade 4, a woman came and pulled me out of the classroom. I couldn't understand what was happening. But long story short, I found out from my mother not long ago that, oh, yeah, they thought you were a genius in the brilliance scale. And I thought, oh, I wish somebody would have told me. I'm 43. Nobody told me. But no, I grew up in Fredericton and always felt not othered, but I experienced, and my family and my siblings, racism and discrimination. And I felt it very young as a child because growing up in Botswana, being lighter, fair-skinned, we were more black, we were brown, black, but more white there
white,
and here. Yeah. So it was a huge culture shock. And growing up in Fredericton, I had a lovely experience growing up in Fredericton, but I did experience some more subtle forms and overt. And when I went to university at St. Thomas, my first year, I was, they were the same thing again, same again. I was the girl that was the black white girl that grew up in Fredericton from Botswana.
Mhm.
And the brown students on campus were also international students. But growing up as the years went by, and this is in the early 2000s, I didn't grow up seeing a lot of culture and brown around me. And now when I visit Fredericton, I'm like, everywhere I look. And I love that about living in Atlantic Canada. The East Coast is my favorite place to live. I've lived in Vancouver. I've lived in Ontario. And now I'm in Nova Scotia. And when I look around me, all I see is a sea of brown. I see difference. I see culture. I love it. I love being able to have different types of food and to finally get my hair done at a place with somebody who knows how to do my hair and isn't intimidated by curls. And, people are loving each other more than they did before, but I'm still seeing the hate that's out there too. And I thought moving to Nova Scotia, and I've only lived in Nova Scotia, not going on quite a year now, but I thought, okay, with a larger Black population and more brown, there's got to be less racism there. There's got to be. But
Yeah.
I've seen it more now than I have seen it growing up. And it's not just happening to me. I'm seeing it with other people. I went into an RBC bank the other day, and there were these two elderly white men, and the bank intern was, I could tell just looking at him, he's from Africa. I could hear his accent. And they kept saying, "Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother." And I'm just standing there and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, okay, you're these two elderly white men talking to this young Black man who's from Africa and is working at a bank here in Halifax, and you're calling him brother. You're not his brother. You're not his brother. He's a kid. He could be your son. Why are you calling him brother? Anyway, so that bothered me. And then when I got up
Absolutely.
the line, I said to the bank teller, I said, "I'm originally from Botswana, Africa." I said, "I know you're from Africa too. Where are you from?" And he told me Kenya. And I said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, you're my brother." Right? Because, and I'm not, and I married a white man. My
Mhm.
children are biracial. My brothers and sisters are biracial. I have biracial friends, but it doesn't matter how light, dark, we're all feeling it. And systemic discrimination, and even being able to get a job. I met an engineer the other day from Nigeria, and he was talking about how difficult it was for him to find a job in his field. And the difficulty of finding a job in his field, and we were talking about it, was his name. Right? If you write a job,
Yes.
apply for
Yes.
put your name on a resume. And he told me, I said, "Tell me your full name." And he told me, and I said, "Yeah, the name." He goes, "Yes, it is." People are changing their names on resumes. We have
Yes.
taxi drivers that are driving us around that are doctors, that are
Yep.
other countries. We're in a healthcare crisis, a mental health crisis, systemic discrimination, racism. Look at what's happening with our Indigenous community. Like, what has been going on? Like, there seems to be so much hatred out there in the world right now, and people
The
hurting each other everywhere, fighting because of difference. I mean, it's 2024. When is the world going to change?
That's such a good question because, when we grew up in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, there was always this argument that the world was getting better. People were learning to get along better. Racism was on the decline. When people say things like the good old days, you could get angry and be like, no, the world was not good back then. The world was horrible back then, and we're making progress. But it does seem that during these past 10 or so years that we're facing a decline in the opposite direction again, right? We are getting more hostile. We are getting more polarized. We're separating ourselves from others more. We're more quick to lash out and be angry and want to fight. And, there's always been war. There hasn't been sort of conflict like what's going on right now in a while. But yeah, there is this degradation of our society happening
Mhm.
all over the world, and everyone's looking around and just asking, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, hate is on the rise. Racism, which we were thinking was
Mhm.
declining, it's exploding again. It's a complete polarization. You can blame social media, you can blame political instability or
Mhm.
inflation, or this happened before COVID and Trump. This was brewing.
Yeah.
But you touched on so many things in your intro that I want to ask you about before we move
Mm.
forward. And You've touched on so many things that Hillary and I have talked about on so many episodes, the two of us being intercultural as well, with a black parent and a white parent, and
Mhm.
the dynamic and the difference that is in growing up. I'm going to ask you a bunch of short questions,
Mhm.
and just because, again, there's so many things you said that I want to touch on. So between Botswana and Zimbabwe, to anyone who doesn't know Africa well, that's just north of South Africa. So would that still be considered Southern Africa
Mm.
compared to West or East Africa, right?
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
And the two different villages. So your grandparents' marriage was a sort of a violation of
Mm.
local law and custom. Um, how did how was that allowed? And how did I believe your grandparents, or was it your parents, make the decision to leave Southern Africa, not the country of South Africa,
Mm.
and move to Indiana? Like how do you get from Botswana to Indiana?
Oh, well, my grandparents were from opposing tribes, and how
Right.
they got together is they left Zimbabwe to go to Zambia, and that's where they
Mm.
settled. That's how they got away and were able to be
That's how they got
together.
away with getting married. And then why the decision? What was in Indiana waiting for your
Oh, that was my
grandparents?
parents. That's my family
Okay,
of
that
origin.
part was your
Yes.
parents. Okay,
Yes.
what was
Yes.
in Indiana for your parents?
Well,
So they wanted to
my
immigrate?
little brother was born, and he was born with little arms, and so we had to move. We
Mhm.
moved from Botswana to Indiana to be near the Shriners Hospital
To get the medical
and
attention he needed.
get medical attention that my little brother needed. Yeah, now he's
Okay.
since passed. Yeah.
I don't know anything or much about Indiana. I think you mentioned culture shock, or maybe for your parents. You were pretty young at the time, I understand.
Oh, it was culture shock. Even the home that we bought, we were supposed to buy a home in a different area, but
Mhm.
because of the black white, we ended up living in a community in a neighborhood that we probably would not have bought a home in.
Was it a So there's a lot of separation down there still? Was it a
Yeah.
black community or a white community that you moved into?
A mix. We had a mix of different cultures all around
Oh,
us, but
okay.
we didn't end up in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. And the school that I went to had a black principal, a female. I thought that was amazing. I couldn't
That is
believe it. Like, wow, a black principal in Indiana. And I'd never seen homeless white people before. That was a culture shock.
is your
Because I
father
my father, pardon me?
Oh, well, go ahead. You never seen homeless white people before?
Yeah, no, I'd never seen poor white people. I did I it was we were driving one day and I said, "Oh, why is that white person on the street that dressed like that?"
Mhm.
And I had never seen it because I'd
The
seen the opposite. It was
white
just
people in Zimbabwe tended to be well-to-do and well-off.
yeah, and
Um,
Botswana and everywhere around. I didn't travel to South Africa. Apartheid was going on then.
was it okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Your parent that was white, are they from Zimbabwe as well? Were they from Africa?
No, from Nova Scotia.
Ah, okay.
My
I
grandparents
wasn't
were
sure if you'd mentioned that.
missionaries. Yeah, my grandparents were
Missionaries?
missionaries. Mhm.
Okay, and that's how you ended up
Right.
relocating from Indiana back up to Nova Scotia. Okay,
Mhm.
perfect. No, I relate to that story. My father is from Jamaica, and 15 years during one of my visits to Jamaica, me and my sister were walking through this teeny tiny little village, and I will say, I grew up with a lot of the same some of the same concerns, like, am I black? Am I white?
Yeah.
I'm black to the white kids, and maybe I'm white to
Mhm.
some of the black kids. And we
Mhm.
were walking around this village, and
Mhm.
everyone was just staring at us everywhere we went. They couldn't take their eyes off us. And eventually we asked the little 8-year-old boy, like, why is everyone staring at us? Is there something we did wrong? Is there something going on? And the little kid looks up at us and he goes, nah, don't bother with them. They just never seen white people before. And it was interesting culturally, because growing up in Toronto,
Mhm.
um, I don't know if I mean I live the experiences of a black person, but I never thought of myself as white, and so
I
I can
know,
see how
right?
in Zimbabwe you could have been made out to feel white.
In
Um,
Botswana, yeah.
Botswana, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I find it really interesting that in your elementary school there were at least 10 brown kids. I didn't grow up in New Brunswick, but almost everyone I've talked to of color, they always say that they were the only one in their school.
It was 2
So you're,
families.
yeah, okay. The two families made up the 10 kids, and were some of those your siblings?
Yes, half of them.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay. Two families, that makes more sense. Because for New Brunswick,
Yeah.
I won't even guess how young you are. You look my age or younger. Um, However, yeah, that's actually pretty diverse from what I hear about other New Brunswickers, and probably even people
Yeah.
you've met over the years.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
a university.
I also find it really interesting that you keep using the term brown and not black, because even though I am the co-host of a show called BlackLantic, I'm firmly of the belief that white and black are just made up terms that don't
Yeah.
really exist or apply to people, and that all humans are really just different shades of brown
Mhm.
and maybe beige, if you want to argue that. But we're all the same. We're all the
Yeah,
same. We just have more or less
yeah,
melanin and pigment. No one is black. No one is white.
I
Those are just
know,
dividing terms.
no. I
And
prefer to
yep,
say brown. Yeah, I prefer to say brown now.
no, I like
And
that.
I have 4 children, and my 4 children are different shades of brown, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Uh, so me and my siblings, we all came out the exact same tone. But growing up, we actually, when we would go out to visit my uncle, who was in the army in Ontario, they had some friends who had a white dad, black mom, white daughter, black son. It was so, yeah, yeah, it was so interesting, and it was that was their family. Like, the
Yeah,
dad was white, the son was black, the daughter was white, and the mom was black, and that's just how genetics works. So
yeah,
all your kids are different shades. That's very interesting.
yeah.
Um, I think those are a lot of the questions I wanted to cover from your interesting
Mhm,
story. Other than, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been an ongoing problem with immigration. You have
yeah,
doctors, and we're plucking the best and the brightest from their countries, arguably hurting their economies, bringing
mhm,
them here with the promise of a better world, and then not telling them that your degrees and your certifications don't mean anything when you get here. You got to start at the bottom of the barrel,
mhm,
uh, and Canada's not even that great to begin with.
mhm,
Depending on where you're coming from.
mhm,
At least
mhm,
that's my opinion. As we've learned more and more about Canada, I'm going to stop talking soon so you can continue. But as we've learned more and more about Canada over the years, I'm always saying, like, oh yes, well, this happened, but I'm still proud to be a Canadian. Oh well, I know that happened in our history, but I'm still proud to be a Canadian. And it's getting harder to say that. It's getting harder to say that, unfortunately, for me. That's my personal opinion.
mhm, mhm.
Um, so you you moved out to Nova Scotia about a year ago, and you were shocked by the racism you experienced there. Yeah,
Mhm.
being in a more diverse area feels great. For me, the more diverse New Brunswick gets, the more it
Mhm.
reminds me of Toronto, and I really enjoy that. But you're right. It doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't guarantee that you will
No.
be more free from prejudice
Mhm.
or judgment or racism.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, you are quite educated.
Mhm.
You have a number of degrees. You are also an artist. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you did after high school?
After high school, I obtained a BA from St. Thomas University. I did a post-degree social work program, a master's degree in education and critical studies, and then I did my master's degree in clinical social work. And I've been
Wow.
in private practice the last on and off about 4 years, 5 years, but I took some time off working part-time to look after my children, my 3 little young ones, and I have an older adult child. And yeah, I've taught, I've developed. I started off a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in mental health and addictions. Very short career in child protection. I did a semester of a PhD program at the University of New Brunswick, but because for medical reasons I had to withdraw. Because I was at the time had just released from the Canadian Armed Forces, and I had suffered a traumatic event following a military function. So I walked away from that career and went into private practice, and then found out that Ottawa had received my paperwork and saw a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a result, I received a disability pension, and that's how I support myself and my children.
Okay. Before we get into the military, it's you're so well trained and so well educated, and you've worked in so many different fields, and there are so few people working in this field in Canada, and especially Atlantic Canada. So few people who are cultural or intercultural like us, and so you're definitely a rare gem, because so do you practice psychology specifically? Like, do you?
No, clinical social work.
Okay, so sorry. Okay, so clinical
Yeah.
social work, and again, it's just I personally feel, I don't know the people you deal with directly, but if you're dealing with people of color or anything of that matter, if you are, it's just so important to have people that look like us.
Oh, it does. It makes such a huge difference. Even having a teacher in school and going into a library and seeing books by authors that look like you, and people on TV that look like you, and
Yeah, so
this,
shared life stories.
yeah, and we relate, right? We relate, and I see with my own children. We only have been in Nova Scotia less than a year, but my children, when I heard I am Black and you're different shades of brown, and one of them is 13 years old, turned 13 last year, and said that at age 12. And I heard that, and I thought, wow, identity. It matters. They couldn't say that in New Brunswick. They went to an elementary school where they were one of few brown, Black kids,
Yeah.
right? And they come to Nova Scotia and they're seeing culture around them and brown everywhere, more than where they were growing up in Rossay, in New Brunswick. And to say that identity at that age, I thought, wow, because at that age, I was still being asked, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
You're not Black, but you're not white. But what are you? Are you Egyptian? Are you from Brazil? Are you from South America? I couldn't understand the biracial Black-white, right? And I
Absolutely.
grew up close to South Africa, apartheid. Black and white were not allowed to be together. The world was receiving
Absolutely.
that message at the time. I grew up in that era.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's huge.
When my parents were married in Jamaica in the 60s, they were married before the civil rights movement took place in the States. And I guess it was pretty normal in Jamaica, but even growing up in Toronto, you see intercultural Black and white kids everywhere nowadays. But even in the
Yeah.
80s, for me, growing up in Toronto, I grew up around all kinds of cultures and from different countries, but not really any Black and white kids, with my specific experiences. And everyone would constantly ask, like, where are you from? Are you Cuban? Are you Puerto Rican, Somalian, Ethiopian? Like, where no one, like, where are you from? And they would never guess. They would never
I
guess Black and
know.
white, because it was very uncommon.
Because it was very taboo. Look at the slave era,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Black and white was not supposed to, they weren't supposed to get together. And we're products of people that were told to not be together, and we're I say biracial, black, white, brown. If you have that experience and knowing that black and white, even in the southern US, men were being hung. Come on.
Killed, yeah.
Right?
So
And
interesting. Yeah.
interracial marriages and relationships, we got a lot of hate too.
Yep.
It's hard.
How did apartheid in South Africa, did those politics sort of spill over into
Oh,
Botswana or
yes.
Zimbabwe? Yes. Okay. So
Yes.
it influenced culture and
Oh,
racism
yes.
and the
And
separation and divide.
I knew black and white people were supposed to hate each other. I couldn't
Wow.
understand it as a child. I used to hear about Nelson Mandela and I used to cry. And my next trip to Africa is to Cape Town. I want to go to Robben Island. I want to go see where he laid his head and how, after 27 years of being imprisoned, can walk out and inspire hope and love and togetherness. But look at where we are now. What happened? How did we go backwards from that? I don't understand. Why are we hating people again?
It's
Right?
so weird.
Nelson
Yeah.
Mandela inspired a nation. Like I thought the world was changing. I was like, black and white people can love each other now. I was taught as a kid that we were just not supposed to. And what my parents were black and white, and I didn't feel like we were loved as a family. Right?
Right. It seems like since World War II, with the threat of nuclear weapons and the world almost being destroyed, and then the United Nations being formed, there's been this effort for 75 years to try to make ourselves more than, I guess, the animals that some of us are, right? I don't mean to offend anyone, but you know what I mean? And it just seems like recently we're sort of reverting back to this carnal, like, stuff that we used to call the history of the past, when people were so
I can't
cruel and
believe
heartless towards each other.
yeah, and I was an advocate throughout university for issues such as this as well. And I can't believe it's 20 years later, I'm still an advocate. Like I'm in the advocacy role, and somebody has to. Like this is a fight. Like this is why are we still fighting this? My daughter's 7. I don't want her talking about this at 43. That's how old I am. Why is the world not changing? Like
the
what's
goal
happening
is
around
The
us?
goal is that she'll be talking about it less, but I think it'll be hundreds of years, right? From generation to generation, from a grandparent's influence over their
Yeah.
grandchild, a good 70-year spread of a grandparent's views in their 70s or 80s can be passed down to a 4-year-old so easy. It's going to take a long time. But speaking of global politics and, organizations that exist in every country that, depending on your viewpoint on them, are meant to provide the freedom and liberation of people, or possibly the oppression of them. You were a part of one of those organizations, and you are a veteran of the Canadian Army. And I want to say myself, thank you so much for your service. To all of our listeners out there, regardless of what you think of Canadian politics, regardless of what you think of our military, you are a member of an organization whose goal is to protect us in the face of the world, to serve and protect. You joined the military in what year?
I joined in 2011, and I got out in 2014. I served active 2 years and 8 months. I spent a year on maternity leave. So I had a very, very short career.
Your role, yet you accomplished a lot. Your role was to provide trauma counseling to those in the military. Is that correct? Why don't you tell us why you got into the Army and what your experience was like?
Well, I provided, counseling to soldiers that had come back from Afghanistan. So I heard some stories, and I worked on a short-term team, so I didn't work with soldiers long-term with serious, persistent, chronic issues, more the lighter ones. And then it was just because of the team that I was on, because I was still in training. After that, I had to do a French course following boot camp. And then I was being posted to Cold Lake, Alberta. where I was going to be part of the mental health team there as a fully trained social worker officer. So I was still undergoing my training. And it was a dream career. It was something that I worked for, something that I was sticking with, something that I wanted to do. We screened soldiers going to Afghanistan, right? And so we knew and had to do a very quick assessment who could go, who couldn't go, who maybe we probably should talk to them again about some other things to see if they're a candidate to go. It was a very busy time. There was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in Base Town, and I was going to have a deployment to Afghanistan. I wanted to go. Social workers were behind the wire, and they were receiving soldiers that came back that were traumatized, right, from just coming in, right? And I knew after working in acute care, and one of the units I loved covering was the ER when I worked in British Columbia, in the Vancouver area, was just that I could handle that level of quick, fast-paced trauma. And I could be that person. And I saw things that the average social worker doesn't see in the civilian world. And it was the adrenaline rush and being able to help somebody in a crisis situation, and somebody that came in traumatized. I knew I had it in me to do this job. And so that was my dream. And I walked away from a dream because I suffered a sexual assault following a military function I was obligated to attend. And I have very little memory of that event, but some details that were told and a story that was kept sacred. And after going to the Veteran Review Board for appealing a decision for this critical injury benefit, which is normally given to soldiers that have suffered a severe traumatic event, more related to an amputation, something severe, life-changing physically. But I applied for it and I appealed it because part of my body is my brain. And having gone through something so traumatic, it had lasting impacts on me. And so 2 years later, in 2016, I applied and I appealed it last year, and I won it for the first time, set a precedent for the country for military sexual trauma victims who have suffered PTSD as a result of an event. And I think to myself, wow, this is incredible. Sad, but it's incredible because I stopped a war. It's called sexual misconduct. We've been talking about it for a long time. We've been talking about it for about almost a decade, because the conversation started in 2014. I really started paying attention to it, and even hearing the stories with RCMP. And I thought to myself, after this, setting this precedent, and one had been set a year before by a friend of mine, Fabian Henry, for receiving it for PTSD for going to Afghanistan and witnessing horror there and being traumatized. I thought, this is huge. This is so huge for the country. And I'm a Black woman, and I just made Black history too. Like, this is amazing. And people are getting validation, and people are getting support, and people are coming forward and telling their stories and saying, thank you for speaking up. Thank you for being that face. Thank you for telling your story. Because of your story, I feel I have the bravery to come forward and tell mine, right? And if they have that health history, they're going to get this, right? And it's going to change lives. And it's going to give people healing. And the federal government cannot afford to give critical injury benefit payments out to survivors. So I stopped a war right here. That's how I think about why I joined, and that's why I joined. I wanted to stop a war. And I think, okay, I didn't get to Afghanistan, but right here with the critical injury benefit, people can't keep getting hurt. The country cannot keep giving out these amounts because now we have a new one out, another claim, right? All these consequential conditions and people not getting the right supports in place right away. But look around us, who has access to health benefits? Many people don't. But the country's in a mental health crisis right now.
Absolutely.
Like, that's why we're hating on each other. It's because we're hurting inside. Because
We
people,
go ahead.
yeah, people are really, really hurting.
People are hurting, and there are not enough workers in the mental health field. It's unaffordable and out of reach for many individuals, and it's so important, our mental health. It's hard to pinpoint. It's so easy to say it's our phones and social media, and I'm sure that's a big part of it. It's so hard to pinpoint the root of the mental health crisis, but thank you for sharing that. I know
Mhm.
you have been sharing it a lot. You joined the military in 2011. It was your dream job. You were
Mhm.
working your way up the ranks. You were sidelined one night by an event, that a sexual assault,
Mhm.
which caused you to walk away from your dream job. And you spoke out, and you were denied recognition on two different occasions until finally your appeal was heard, and you were validated, and you were listened to. Um, and you found strength in that. And
Mhm.
by you sharing your story, you are helping others find strength, and not feel so alone, and
Mhm.
feel like maybe, I'm sure they have tried to tell their story before and they weren't listened to.
Hard. It's very hard.
And so when you say you've stopped a war, what I believe you mean is, now that the government has acknowledged and is taking a degree of account for actions that take place within the army, are you saying you've stopped the war? Like, this behavior is going to have to
Mhm.
stop? You're saying this behavior is going to have to stop and go unchecked.
Oh, yeah.
We know for decades and decades and decades within the corporate
Mhm.
workforce, there are all kinds of stories of sexual assault, and there's been so much fighting against that, and sexuality harassment training, and stuff like that. And arguably, the corporate world has gotten better, but within the policing forces and within the military, these things were going unchecked for so
Mhm.
long. And I don't know why. I don't know what it is, about um, military organizations in which the stories we hear, I've never been in the military, are so rampant that it's gone unchecked for so long. So the war you are saying you are winning or preventing is the war here on our own grant land against our own people,
Yeah.
who sign
Yeah.
up to be in the forces,
Mhm.
uh, to help, and end up being traumatized and assaulted
Mhm.
themselves.
Yeah. And my
That's
rank,
really
I think
powerful.
my yeah, and I think my rank is also what is playing a role here because
You, you
uh,
started off quite high,
I was a
correct?
captain.
Due to your accolades and your credentials and your
Mhm.
experience, you were a
And I
captain.
was going, and I had a career plan, right?
Hmm.
Everybody has a career manager. I knew where my career was going to go. I knew where I was headed, and that was taken away from me, right?
What was, I don't want to ask a stupid question here, but like, what has this whole thing been like for you? What has it done to you, and what has it done for you?
What has it done? I honestly, I feel that I it's been almost a decade. I have been a prisoner in my mind, in trauma for a decade, and just surviving, and to have the validation and the support, and yes, okay, That's what happened. That is the story. And that story was known, which is the painful part.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people take the lessons from it and learn from it. And so that this doesn't happen to somebody again. And I am a social worker. That's my background. And social workers are peacekeepers, right? We're peacekeepers. And I feel that I'm not practicing right now, but the values and the ethics that I followed in the career and my own profession were to have integrity and to speak the truth. And yeah, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to heal the world. That's just who I am as a social worker and as a peacekeeper. And I wanted to stop a war then. And I feel that, yeah, this behavior is unacceptable. People can't do this to people. And people need to change. And why are we people having leaders in positions of power that are condoning these behaviors? Take those leaders out and put in better ones, right? And what happened to the ones that were the good ones? But Afghanistan, soldiers coming back, it was a crisis. Some people didn't get the support they needed. Some people kept it to themselves. Some people broke down. Some people didn't make it. Some people are still hurting. Some people are still not sharing their stories. Because the support, who was there when they came back, and who was there for the families. And we had some wonderful, wonderful leaders that were, I was one.
Mm-hmm.
If I would have had the right support around me, I probably would still be in. I still would be in. I sometimes want my job back. Right? I didn't get it. I didn't get the support that I needed.
Oh. Is that something that's even a possibility for you if you wanted to?
No,
I don't
take
know
a
how that
job
works.
I'd take a job as a consultant, though.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't. No, but it still hurts. It still hurts me that was when you have a dream and you achieve a dream and you have to walk away from your dream because you just don't believe in what it stood for, because it didn't stand for truth and justice for me. And I had to walk. I had to walk and to feel and to be getting the validation and the support that, yeah, this was a wrong. This was a big wrong. It was, but take the lessons, do different. Right?
I understand that. Yeah,
Right.
not on your level or not on the same level, but maybe in a parallel level. I understand
Mm,
walking away painfully from something that meant so much to you in terms of a change you wanted to make in the world.
yeah.
But here you are,
And
alive and
I'm here.
strong, the
Yeah,
mother
I'm
to,
here. I'm happy.
I imagine, 4 beautiful children.
Yeah.
And, you're speaking out, you're standing strong. I don't know how this feels for you, if this is easy or hard, but it's something that I know that is important for you to do.
Mhm.
And, you know, where does Zandra go from here when the dust has settled on the work that you're trying to do right now? And I know there's more work coming up in the future.
Mhm.
What will Zandra be up to after that? Do you give that thought?
Yeah. No, I am. I'm looking at eventually having a small private practice and working with children and youth, and doing a bit of counseling, and having a clinic, and hiring staff, and managing more as a man in a managerial role, and just helping others, helping people, helping children, helping families. And I've been looking at doing research into secondary PTSD and how PTSD is affecting our children, our families. Um,
What's
because
secondary PTSD?
it's when, I have good days and I have bad days. I have
Yes.
more good days, but on my bad days, sometimes I'm a bit more withdrawn. Sometimes I appear a bit more sad, and my kids notice.
Yes.
And then they start worrying about me. And, Mom, are you okay? Are you okay, Mom? Right? Or if um, something comes on the television and I say, "Oh, I don't want to watch that," and I walk out of the room because I saw maybe a gun, right? It's memories. And as my kids have gotten old, they're starting to notice that I'm not like some of the other moms. I'm a bit different. Sometimes I become, I'm a bit more anxious. And I do have a service puppy in training. So even them knowing and learning about her, right? And why does mommy have, okay, sometimes trauma memories, I call them. I say, sometimes trauma memories come and they go away. But sometimes maybe one will, hit me, and I need 10 minutes out of the room to process that and move on, and learning how to cope with having PTSD and going out into the world. And because it's a sense of safety and fear that can come up sometimes, right? And things that I notice are in my environment that remind me of the past, but it doesn't happen every single day, but it can happen unexpectedly. And I've learned to develop really great coping skills with how to get through a day.
Absolutely. Healthy coping mechanisms. Sounds
Yeah.
like you're discussing a bit of like cognitive behavior therapy. You need
Mhm.
to you need to take some time to get yourself back into like a window of tolerance, if
Yeah,
I
exactly.
correct terms here. Um,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you because for those listening and possibly those who are feeling that this is bringing up something within them and evoking something within them, and I think we all need therapy, but to those who don't have access to it or are not ready for it, can you share with our listeners before we wrap up, in the face of traumatic experience, what are some of the tactics and techniques that you've used to cope and heal from the kind of experiences you've been through?
Wow, I have always been in therapy. I think that has been something that has been taken me to such a healing place, and I still am in a healing phase. But I have been in therapy
Yeah, they say we before you
time.
finish. Yeah, they say you don't we don't ever heal from
Yeah, no,
PTSD. We learn to walk with and live with those demons, right? So of course you're
yeah.
on a sorry to interrupt you.
Mm,
You're on a healing journey.
mhm.
Um, and how do you work on healing? How do you work on coping? It's therapy?
Yeah, it's therapy, it's listening to music, it's healthy distractions, it's journaling, it's reading positive affirmations, reading positive things, right? Positive quotes, positive self-talk, meditating, taking time in silence, right? And I'm Christian, so I pray too. And
Absolutely.
I believe in a higher power, and I believe, and I just, things will work out. And I just say that to myself, things will work out. There's good days, there's bad days, but I know I have I've learned the skill of a way to just change my mindset from, if I find myself in a negative place, I can pull myself out of that really quickly now. And just with skills that I've learned, that I've practiced over and over, that I've learned to make them work for me. Little things every day, but it's every day.
That's
Every
great.
day I do something. Every day
Faith.
there's positive affirmations. Every day there's prayer and meditation. Every day there's reading. Every day there's music because I need it. That's my calming medicine right there, right?
So just
And
taking the steps.
mhm.
Yeah, it's faith, hope, your thoughts, trying to fill your mind with positive thoughts. We are, like they say,
Mhm.
you are what you eat. I say we
Oh,
are what
yeah,
we consume, and so we are what we think.
yeah,
What we think is what we are.
mhm,
um, and we can't control our initial thoughts, our initial reactions to things, but we can control how we process those afterwards.
mhm.
I hope your words have helped some of the listeners out there,
Yeah.
and I hope that people continue to reach out to you if you can, if that's what you want,
Mm,
um,
mm.
to so they can share their stories and hopefully give you strength, and hopefully you give them some in return. Um,
Oh yeah, helping others helps me,
that's what
helps.
drove you. I wanted to ask you, like,
Yeah.
why did you join the military? But I think I got the answer from you, is because of
Mm,
the adrenaline and the passion and the feeling you get from going out there and trying to change the world. If I'm wrong, please, I don't want to
mm.
put words in your mouth. Is that why
Yeah.
you joined? Did you grow up with people in the
Yeah,
military? Did,
no, I was the girl that joined the
how did you
military
come across the job like that? I mean,
because I I knew about the recruiting center. It was near one of my favorite restaurants when I was in high school, and I just went in one day and I
proximity.
was
Okay.
reading about it, and I thought I'm going to check this place out, and I just found it exciting that I'd be able to join the forces and travel the world and go to war zones and help people and be just a peacekeeper. And yeah, I wanted to change the world. I really did. Yeah. Wanted to
Well,
make it a better place.
even though you're not in the military anymore, I do believe that you will continue to change the
Mm.
world, Zandra. And not to say that we're ending right this second, but to end on a bit of a lighter note, I did read that you'd mentioned a desire to speak to the Prime Minister himself to help advocate for change.
Mhm.
Any progress in realizing that goal of yours? And if you get to do that, what specific issues are you planning to address with Mr. Trudeau? What changes do you hope to see?
Well, I'd like to talk about some different issues, things like with the experience of what happened to me.
Hmm.
I believe that racism and systemic discrimination played a role. Being a
Okay.
woman of color played a role, and a hierarchy of males in positions of power. And I was a young captain. And this person was a higher ranking, white, privileged, high up there soldier.
Okay.
I didn't matter, right? So that's something that I want to talk about, and why this is still happening, right? Why is this still happening? Why are we still having this conversation? And how much longer, and how many more misconduct suits, and what's going on? It's too many. There are too many people that are getting hurt, and it's not right. Something has to change.
Absolutely. I mean, it's undoubtedly, your gender played a huge role in what happened to you. And it might seem ironic to our listeners that I haven't brought this up myself till the end of the episode. You started off in the military in quite a high rank, and yet you still feel that your color of your skin, your race, and even though you were denied twice, you were the first to ever have been accepted after appealing. Um, but you would be of the opinion that being black played a role in how you were treated,
Mhm.
and the fact that you were denied when you came forward.
No, no, no. I was denied only once, and then I won on the appeal. But no, my experience on Base Gagetown, which is different.
You
With,
experienced
with
racism.
yes, during that experience on Base Gagetown, during those investigations, the military police experience, um, being physically there, yeah, it did
Are you
play
at
a role.
liberty to discuss that? I'm so sorry to hear that. I mean, New Brunswick has its own history of
Hmm.
racism that we need to
Yeah.
account for, and are not even close to accounting for compared to the rest of the places like Ontario. But are you allowed, like, are you at liberty to discuss what was
Yeah,
said to you and the
no,
different treatments you received?
I mean, there's racism in the Canadian Armed Forces.
I assume so.
There is.
I
Yeah.
would be surprised to hear that there wasn't.
I was a
What
young
happened to you?
Black woman working in the mental health,
You heard slurs, people judgments.
well, even going through boot
N-word.
camp, for example, in one course, one of the course instructors was using female body parts to describe parts of a gun, one with a racial term. I mean, come on now, right?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. In your
Yeah.
presence?
Oh, in front of the entire classroom, and people were laughing, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's the. I know I'm not trying to be careful with my words, but I mean, like,
It's a conversation I'm going to be having for sure,
there's,
continuing for
yeah,
sure.
no, there's just so much wrong with militaries around the world to begin with, and sure,
Mhm.
without militaries, the bad guys would come in and take everything we have. But it's not like the movies, you know. There's not necessarily a good guy when it comes to global
Mhm.
politics and war and conflict.
Mhm.
Um,
I didn't feel the time looking back that people stood up for me.
yeah, so they saw racism, racial atrocities
I
happening in
felt,
front of you. You
I
were the
felt
odd
like,
one out. You were alone. You were isolated, and what you
yeah,
needed there was
I was
allyship and
pushed.
people. Yeah,
Yeah, and I didn't get it. I felt like I had no choice but to get out and get out as fast as I could.
it's
Right.
certainly a culture of silence, right, and
I didn't feel safe.
protocol,
Mm-hmm.
status
I did
quo.
not feel safe. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's why throughout like America and Canada, you don't see a lot of Black people opting to want to join the army because of the stories that you hear, the stories I've heard my whole life. Even growing up in Toronto, like just comments passing, like
Yeah.
Black person, Black man, don't join the army if you're Black. Like that's what are you thinking? Like you're not going to make it out. Um, Yet you made it out and you're here, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. It's we hope to have a better world for our children, and
I'm working on it.
I've always felt, yeah, it's hard in 2023 and 24 to say that it's going to be a better world for our children.
Mm.
Would have been easier to say that 15 years ago, but we still got to fight the good fight.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. If there's ever we didn't talk about it much on the show, but if
Mm-hmm.
there's ever any writings, journals, blogs, slot stories you even want to share within our platform. We publish blogs and content and stuff like that. Obviously we're not CBC, although we work with them. We'd love to hear your voice and spread your voice in other ways as well. And maybe down the road we'll have you on the show again.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you so much for being a part of this. I think I've said that a couple times already. Are there any final thoughts you want to leave with listeners before we say goodbye?
No, I just hope that somebody, if anyone's out there that connected with the story, that it helps someone. That's why I do. That's why I share. It's just I hope it helps somebody, and it helps other people, and they reach out to other people,
Yeah.
and more people touch each other's lives, and people heal together. Like I think this is a time the world needs a lot of healing, and people are connecting with me, and people are connecting with others and telling me about it. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think this is a time of change. This could potentially be a time of change for a
Yeah.
lot.
And sorry, go ahead.
And yeah, it could be a time to change for a lot of things and a lot of healing that needs to happen around the world right now.
I think so. And I know your hopes are being realized. I know whoever listens to this we helped in some way. And part of why I do this every week is that I've learned so much from you already this evening. I've learned so much about things I didn't know anything about. The Canadian military, some of your stories from Southern Africa and the likes. To all of our listeners, thank you again for your support. If you're listening to us on audio, if you haven't already, please follow, rate, make a comment on our podcast. If you're a visual, make sure you like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you so much. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all your social media handles at BlackLantic. And we're signing out. Thank you once again, Zandra, and